Welcome, everyone. This will be another justice panel. And like I was saying before, this will be the same justice panel as what we did before. So if you were in the last hour with us, you do not need to feel to be in this one as well. I'm sure the conversation won't be exactly the same, but it will be similar. But welcome today. I am Amber Ramirez, and I am the Central Iowa Works Director at United Way of Central Iowa. And we'll have two panelists today. I have Betty Andrews, who's the Iowa-Nebraska president of the NAACP, and Dennis Henderson, who is the Teach and Tech coordinator at Broadlawns Medical Center. Just a few ground rules today. Everyone has entered on mute, so please stay on mute unless you're talking. You can put questions in the chat at any time, and we will try to bring those up. At the end, we'll try to have a little question and answer session if you want, but you can put your questions in at any time. Did someone have a question?
Yes, Amber, none of the other links are working.
Oh, well, that is helpful to know. I hope you're not locked into this one.
As much as I love you guys.
Andy or Elsie, could you please help Stephanie find another link?
Yes, I'm actually seeing some emails to the same effect here. So we may have a lot of people in justice this time. I'm going to work on getting that link working, and I'll post it as soon as I have the correct link for each of those Zooms. Sorry for the confusion.
Thank you. Yes, so if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, or you can come off mute. Some of the issues that we're talking about today are difficult, and people may have opposing opinions, but let's just stay respectful. And everybody, please feel free to share or to ask any questions that you have come up. So today we're talking about justice. In the 21-day equity challenge, day 15 was around justice. So if you haven't seen it yet, please check it out. It really kind of addressed the beginning of the justice system, I think. So more about the policing and incarceration, articles around that. Today, we're going to focus a little bit more on what happens after the reentry process. People are given a sentence and they complete the time and pay their fines. However, there are a lot of things that are consequences that are really maybe unanticipated. Things like how it affects employment, housing, going into your kid's school, volunteering, starting a business, sometimes the ability to vote. There's many things that a criminal history can affect. So we will talk a little bit about that. But to start, Betty is going to give us a little bit of an overview of the situation in Iowa and what the NAACP is doing around the justice issue in general.
Thanks so much, Amber. Again, I'm so grateful to be here and be able to talk with everyone. I'm so grateful also to be sharing I guess, being with Dennis Henderson, who I've worked with for a number of years in this work. So thanks so much. Today, I know we're going to focus on re-entry, but I am going to just kind of give a broad overview of the work of the NAACP in the state of Iowa. One second. There we go. Okay. And I just wanted to, of course, as Amber mentioned, I'm the president of the Iowa-Nebraska NAACP. My passion is addressing criminal justice reform. And I believe that the reason that I have this passion is that when I first heard about the stats around criminal justice reform back in 2000, I want to say 7 or 8, I was absolutely floored. I was floored because the statistic that I heard was that Iowa was #1 in the nation for the over-incarceration of African Americans. And so that meant #1 beating out New York, beating out Chicago, Illinois, where Chicago is, beating out Mississippi, where you would think, Southern, that type of thing. And so being number one. And what that meant in terms of being number one meant that according to those stats at that time from the Sentencing Project, that for every one African American for every one Caucasian American within the criminal justice system, there were almost 14 African Americans in the criminal justice system per capita. Iowa being only 4% of the population, African Americans being only 4% of the Iowa population, yet about 26% of the criminal justice population. That shocked me to no end, that floored me, and immediately I decided that I had to do something. And I didn't know what to do, but I knew that, all my life I've been a strategist and I was going to figure this out. So that allowed me to join forces with a number of people. And through my work with the NAACP, even my work with the NAACP shifted. But that focus for me became around criminal justice. I also focus on some of the other issues because what we found is that they're all interconnected. But that was kind of my why in terms of addressing criminal justice reform. So let's talk about the NAACP. The mission of the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, is to ensure the political, educational, social, and economic equality of rights for all persons and to eliminate race-based discrimination. So the way that we do that is we have areas of engagement called the game changers. And there are 6 game changers. So we address economic sustainability, we address disparities in education, we address public safety and criminal justice, which is what I'll be talking about for the next few minutes. We also address health disparities, which is really important right now during COVID-19. We address voting rights and political representation, as you just saw. There was a lot depending on this election, and kind of some of the things that kind of people that pulled it out were voters of color. So that's just something to note. And then also expanding our youth and young adult engagement. So we try very hard to train up our next leaders. So before we move into this talking more about criminal justice reform, I wanted to just acknowledge the urgency of now. We are in 2020, but for many, there are still multiple challenges. I know we're going to talk about reentry, but we don't want to forget the faces. And here you have Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd. And also we have this last person is my nephew. His name was Manuel Ellis, and he was actually killed walking down the street by police in Tacoma, Washington, earlier this year as well. And then, of course, you don't want to forget that it doesn't stop there. And so these are faces of several people that have had challenges and passed away. So criminal justice reform in Iowa. As I mentioned, some of those stats were extremely alarming to me. And when I say stats, statistics, I often remind people that each one of those stats represent human beings. And that's so important. So the NAACP's criminal justice area has really, we have made it a point, and I've pushed for it to step up. And so in making sure that we are addressing issues around criminal justice reform, we are addressing issues in the area of voting rights for those with felony convictions. I'm sure that most of you have heard that the executive order number 7 was signed on on August 5th of this year, and that is due to a lot of input from a lot of people, but definitely a big part of that was the years of advocacy that the NAACP and other organizations had around that issue. And then eliminating racial profiling. This, addressing criminal justice reform and addressing this over incarceration rate, we have to look at the very beginning of that process. And in looking at the beginning of that process, it begins with the contact that minorities and particularly African Americans have with law enforcement. So addressing racial profiling, and we are doing a lot of work in that area. You might recall that you may have heard that the governor's focus working group on criminal justice reform just released recommendations on unbiased policing in the state of Iowa, with the goal of these being these recommendations being put into law. We have also addressed it at the Des Moines branch level, where the Des Moines level, where the NAACP and I myself served as lead negotiator for the Des Moines Unbiased Policing Ordinance. And we are also working with communities around the state. My understanding is that today, Coralville will be having their first reading of a racial profiling ordinance. We also address re-entry advocacy. I'm going to save some of that for our discussion. And then looking at sentencing reform, dealing with how African Americans tend to be, for the same crime, either charged at a higher rate or convicted at a higher rate. When I say higher rate, a higher level, so that they receive harsher penalties for very much crimes that are very similar. So mentioned crack cocaine versus powder cocaine, even though they're the same substances. And as Dennis pointed out in our last session, the difference being baking soda. One is a drug that African Americans and other people who are poor use, crack cocaine, and the other one is more the affluent public, people who are a little more affluent, I shouldn't say a little, people who are more affluent use, yet the conviction for crack cocaine is double here at the local, and I believe it's still at like 17 times that at the national level, down from about 100 times. So and then we also address bail reform and pretrial release, giving people the opportunity to improve and make some changes before they go to court, whereas people who have money are able to make those changes because they can get out, but people who don't have money are unfortunately sitting in jail. And so when they get out, they are not able, or when they stand in front of a judge, they're not able to say, well, I sought treatment while I was waiting for the courts, my court date. Also, of course, equity in jails and prison, and then education and awareness around this issue. We also address the school to prison pipeline and dealing with behaviors that once were schoolhouse horse playing that are now criminalized, and particularly criminalized for people of color. Some of the accomplishments and the work that the NAACP has done, as I mentioned, of course, recently is working with the governor on the signing of Executive Order 7 that gives people with a felony background the opportunity to vote, and without having to, once they're off of probation and parole, pay any fines or fees. And then, of course, as I mentioned, the anti-racial profiling ordinances, we were the key player in terms of getting the governor to appoint the Focus Committee on Criminal Justice Reform. We also have with the Iowa Chiefs Association. We have an Equity and Law Enforcement Task Force. We also work with the Iowa Summit on Justice and Disparities to address and educate people about these issues. And then, of course, we work to resolve criminal justice disparities. And then the Iowa NAACP has worked and successfully worked to enact about 15 criminal justice laws and reforms in the last, I'd say, 4 or 5 years. So we've really been busy. And that was at the state level. There's a number more at local levels as well. And of course, I mentioned the voting rights. So in addition to working with the governor to get the right to vote for people with felony backgrounds, we have also, we didn't stop there. We petitioned the Secretary of State's office to update their information and make sure that that is distributed so that people would feel welcome to vote. And then we also successfully petitioned for the commission on the registration form to convene and make some changes in that form so it would be more clear that people with felony backgrounds were allowed to vote. Ban the box is another area. We've introduced legislation or proposed legislation, and we're very hopeful. The governor's focus group has made recommendations in this area. So specifically addressing banning the box and making sure, which means banning the box that asks if you have been convicted of a felony on the application. And I know we'll talk about that a little bit more. And then, as I mentioned, racial profiling. I also mentioned the governor's working group. Wanted to also mention the Iowa Summit on Justice and Disparities. This is a summit where we have numerous stakeholders. We have national experts. We have our governor, our chief justice they've both been regulars at the event. We have advocates. We have formerly incarcerated. Dennis has attended and been a part of it regularly. We have youth advocates, law enforcement, all people coming together to address these issues. And I know that we often say, address issues with the criminal justice system, but really it is separate systems that make up the criminal justice system. And many times they don't know what each other are doing. And so part of what we do with the summit is it is a strategy to connect and then also address these issues. This past year, we had representatives from Georgetown Law, and then we also had Paul Butler, who is the author of The Chokehold, which is a book that's right up there with Michelle Alexander's New Jim Crow. And then this is just talking about joining our work. And I don't know why I have I'll make your world in there, but that's just kind of a really, really broad overview of some of the work the NAACP is doing. It's multifaceted, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Betty, for setting the stage and helping us understand a little bit more about what's happening in the community. Dennis, for you, you are the Teach and Tech Coordinator at Broadlawns Medical Center, and employment is one of the factors that has been found to lower recidivism. So what's your role at Broadlawns, and how is Broadlawns supporting people who have criminal histories?
Okay, my name is Dennis Henderson, and I am the program coordinator for Broadlawns. One of the things that Broadlawns did is Jody Jenner and Wayne Ford went out to Baltimore, and Baltimore was doing what they call an anchor program. That program took people from the community and put them in entry-level jobs, not only at the hospital, but also at the college. So when Jody and Wayne came back to Des Moines. They wanted to take it up a step. Jody said, I just don't want to give people an entry level job. I want to put them on a career path. So they created Teach and Tech, training and educating adults in careers in healthcare. And what that does is it allows them, we take them through some soft skills training. We allow them to shadow different areas in the hospital, because Broadlines is not like ER where you just see doctors and nurses. There's a lot of components that go into a hospital that a lot of people are not aware of. So you have all these different tech situations, whether it's lab tech, radiology tech. So there's numerous positions that you can hold. So we give them an opportunity to do that, but we also partner with DMAC, and DMAC does the education piece. So when the people leave this program, they have 6 college credits that are transferable, meaning that they can go on to be an RNs or something of that nature, or doctors or physician assistants. We have people that want to branch off, but we pay for everything, and we give them an opportunity to not only complete the program, but we offer them all jobs once they leave. I've been through 9 adult cohorts, and we also do it with the high schools, which we call our tech program, and it's for incoming seniors and graduating seniors. And most of these kids come in, they end up getting jobs here and stay for a long time. So we deal with people with barriers to employment. That barriers could be single parent mother, that could be hold nothing but entry level jobs. It could be a criminal background. So we have a good relationship with DHS. We vet these guys to make sure that they're capable of providing good care to our patients, and we make sure that that they don't have any crimes that will affect their ability to do that. We also make sure that they get jobs after they successfully complete the program.
Dennis, can you talk a little bit more about the criminal background check and the differences that Broadlands has made? Because I think it's important for people to understand that previous to this program, a lot of the perception in the community was that people with criminal histories couldn't work in healthcare. So how did Broadlines change that, and what does it look like now?
Okay, so I worked up at the Capitol. I was a lobbyist for Justice Reform Consortium, and me and Chuck Palmer, who was the DHS director at the time, they were trying to find ways that they could get people into different positions, different jobs, and healthcare happened to be one of them. Chuck was very instrumental in getting us started down that process. So DHS came to us and said, we went to DHS, and we worked out a situation where they said, here are people that we will not even consider. And that helped quite a bit. So we knew where that threshold was, and we never breached that threshold. So we already had a set of people that were disqualified. So another thing that they wanted to do is they wanted to make sure that the people that got involved in this program had taken measures. So it's how long you've been out of prison, what were your risks? What were your original crimes? So if you had a crime for marijuana, that has basically nothing to do with healthcare. So why would that prevent you from getting a job in the healthcare field? Now, if you had any abuses or something like that, that would be an automatic disqualifier. So we worked out that language with them, and we go through a vigorous application process where they come in and we do an interview to make sure they go over all their crimes. And if there's any discrepancy in what they tell us and what's on that record, we make sure that they own whatever crime that it was that they committed, and then we can move from there. And it has worked out very well for us so far.
Thanks. Betty, could you address a little bit more about Ban the Box and how that could help employers find more qualified candidates?
Sure. Just an explanation of Ban the Box. And Ban the Box is one of the areas that the NAACP works in, which involving reentry. So Ban the Box is, and a lot of people are not really sure what it is. It is the removal of the question from the application that asks if a person has been convicted of a felony usually, but sometimes it says or any crime, and sometimes it asks even about a traffic ticket. But what banning the box policy does, and I think a lot of people have this misnomer, is that it doesn't completely prevent an employer from doing a background check, but what the goal is for people to give people a chance to explain themselves and talk about the jobs and talk about their skill. And then if they're, and to delay that question until either the time of the interview or the time of the offer. And so it allows people to showcase themselves and say that, I can do this job. And it gives employers the opportunity to think about that possibility. It's not foolproof, but it is an opportunity when many people, when they see the application, if that box is checked, they will automatically throw that application away. Do you want me to talk a little bit more about some of the other areas of reentry in which we work? Or?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so some of the other places in which the NAACP works in terms of reentry is that we were in our advocacy work able to get a couple of laws passed on juvenile record sealing. So those laws are designed to prevent people who have had may have had an issue when they were a juvenile, made a poor decision. And as we know, our brains are not fully developed until we're about 26 years old. So it gives people a chance that once they are an adult, that record can then be sealed. And the goal is to allow them to go into adulthood without that record. But as I know a lot of people have pointed out, that the other part of that is that we know we have to work with some of the companies that mine this information and mine the newspapers and look at this information and report it to employers, even though it is sealed through the government. So that's an area that we have to address. We also work in the area of addressing fines and fees. Many times there are fines and fees that are attached to a conviction or that are it's as anything like, so a lot of people at times people think when you get a public defender that you're getting a free attorney. You're not getting a free attorney. You actually have to pay for that attorney. So that is tacked onto your sentence. A lot of times people think that when they go to jail that the government is footing that bill. No. Oftentimes it is the individual that gets tacked on to their bill too. So people come out of prison with a lot of debt and are then not able to get a job as readily and still have to address this debt. And it's a way to kind of pull people back into the system. We of course deal with voting and making sure that people are able to vote, as you've seen with our success with the executive order number 7. And then one other area in which we have worked in with the governor's focus group on criminal justice reform is licensing issues for those that are coming out of prison. So we have in the past had many cases where in the prisons, there was an apprenticeship program and people attend and spend years going through that apprenticeship program only to find out when they got out of jail that the licensing board for that profession was not admitting them to that profession. So they wasted a lot of time. And again, thinking about the mindset that a person has to have to come out. So that's a huge blow for people. And that's the other thing that we address. We address the mindset, working with the mindset. And I know Dennis does a hands-on piece with that in terms of helping people get through this process, but also the mindset of employers in thinking through this issue and also challenging them to go beyond some of the myths around things like ban the box or hiring someone with a felony background. So that's some of the things that we do in the area of reentry.
Thanks, Betty. There was a question in the chat. Do you have any data yet showing the turnout of voters who recently had their voting rights restored?
Sure. So thank you for that question. And yes, we are anxiously awaiting that data. We, at this time, we received information from the Secretary of State's office in the middle of October. And at that time, it was during the month of August. So only the month of August, which was, the order was signed August 5th. There were about 2,500 people with felony backgrounds that registered to vote. So we don't have stats on September, October, and then with November and same day voting and registration, we don't have those stats. But as soon as we get them, we will make sure that people are aware. So I'm actually proud that because of the work that I and others have done, at least, and if we just multiply that by each month, 7,500 people got to vote that weren't able to vote in the past. So I'm extremely proud of helping them get their rights back and become, part of society as they should be.
That's amazing. And yeah, so we want to congratulate all your efforts too, because that was a huge win.
Thank you.
Dennis, I want to go back to you. And can you tell us a little bit about your own reentry story and some of the obstacles that you faced as you were coming back to the community?
Okay, so when I first got out, I was fortunate. I went to the Fort Des Moines, and one of my high school friends actually was a counselor out at Fort Des Moines. And what he did is, not only did he take me to the job for the interview, he sit in on the interview with me. So after serving 25 years, I come out and in 8 days, I have a job. But the only thing about that is it was a seasonal job. I end up getting laid off, and I hadn't worked enough quarters to qualify for unemployment. So that's when I went to Urban Dreams, and I went down and talked to Wayne Ford, and Wayne Ford made it possible for me to do grub jobs. I shoveled snow, I cut grass, I painted walls, I cleaned carpets. I did all this stuff just so I could pay my rent. So after a while, I ended up, there was a position that came open. So he hired me as his ex-offender coordinator. And from there, I ended up being the coordinator of Growing Through Gardens, a program that he did with the Department of Agriculture. That went well. Then we went on to become a resource specialist with Gateway to College, because we had a partnership with DMAC. And then that's when I ended up getting this role at Broadlands. But one of the main things that I ended up having to stay in an attic. I had to stay in transitional living. So I tell people all the time that work, employment, housing, and transportation. And back to Betty's point, there are over 20-something laws that have nothing to do with driving that can get your license taken. At one of our advisory committees, when we were doing the Justice and Disparity, we talked to Bill McCarthy, and he told us about the unintended consequences. They only can recover about 20% of all these fines and fees. But what ends up happening is a lot of people are driving without license. So if you're driving without license, that also means you're driving without insurance. So if you happen to get in a car accident, the likelihood of somebody taking off and running is very high. So it's these unintended consequences that need to be addressed. It's the same way with housing. I have some friends who have domestic charges. They can't find housing. So now they're out in the streets, all hours of the night. So it's really against public safety not to be able to offer these people places to go and stay, especially if we deem that they're fit for society. I'd say that the parole board has all these experts that we have to go before we get released. So I think that's the litmus test. If you say that, I'm worthy of coming back, then I think you should make me whole. And if not, at least facilitate the process and not put up barriers to hinder me from being successful.
Can I just comment on Dennis's reference to driver's license? And it's just real brief. Absolutely right that there are so many laws out there that have nothing to do with driving. And one in particular is a failure to pay child support. And that has nothing to do with driving. And if you think about people who have been convicted and then return to society and may not have a job and may not have been paying all the years of child support coming into now, and then they're unable to get a license, and then because they don't have a license, they're limited in the work that they can do. It just becomes a never-ending cycle. And so what we're here for in addressing these issues of people getting licensed is we're here to break that cycle. And I know that the NAACP has been working with and meeting with the Department of Transportation on issues of this nature, because it's a scary situation. I know any of us, not just people coming out, but if any of us did not have our license, what would we do? That would be an extreme challenge for us.
Yes, it's very true. Thank you. Dennis, I want to come back to the employer's point of view. And could you talk a little bit about Broadlawns and how has it been? Was there any pushback? Was it difficult to start the Teach and Tech programs, either from the HR point of view and the policies, or from other people in the organization and how they felt?
There's always going to be some pushback, but because our program was started from the top down, it quelled a lot of that, but we still had folks that thought that this was a giveaway program. And for some reason, the certificates that people were getting from our program wasn't of the quality that they got because they spent their money to get it, and it wasn't. But HR had to go through a lot of difficulties because the way the program is set up, it's really, really HR intense because they have all these compliance and rules and regulations that they had to go through. And matter of fact, my hire was based on the fact that they needed a liaison between HR and the folks that participated in our program, because we knew they were coming with barriers of employment and different background situations. They wanted somebody to come in and being able to have that type of experience already in their background. So that helped quite a bit as far as that part. But we have employees to this day who don't specifically like the program, but it's a personal thing. But we have way more people, especially our supervisors, who embrace the program. And over the time, it seems like we're winning more and more people to our side because the need is so vast for tech workers. This is not an easy job. So anybody that can get the skills and perform this work, it's not like it's a gravy train. No, they have to work for their money.
Thank you. Betty, do you have any advice, or how does the NAACP support employers or other agencies that are trying to open up some of these obstacles or get rid of some of the obstacles in the community? Do you want to talk a little bit about how the accomplishments that the NAACP has had and some of the things you're working on?
Sure. So one of the things that we have been able to do is convene employer roundtables. And in convening those roundtables, I am actually in Iowa and Nebraska. So we've conducted those roundtables across both states. We're able to share stories about best practices in this realm. And one of the, in those employer roundtables, just a quick story, there was an employer here locally in Iowa that raised the point that they had actually hired someone who was, they have a ban the box policy. And that policy essentially said, whatever that crime is, you need to hear them out and not jump to conclusions. And there was one person that actually came in and had a murder conviction on their record. And but after talking with the individual, they found out it was not at all what it appeared to be. And that person was hired. So, and other employers got to hear that story. So, and this was a pretty, it was one of Iowa's largest employers. So for them to hear that, for other employers to hear that one of our largest employers stepped out on faith, I think that that's helpful. But we also, from not only here locally, but from our national office, bring in a number of resources so that people can make those decisions. One other myth that we work with is, that people kind of push up against the ban the box is that that banning the box, and I lost it, but let's see, it'll come back to me. I'll bring it up when it does. I apologize, I lost it.
No problem, that happens to me all the time. Just let me know when you get it back.
Yeah.
Okay, Amber, can I speak on that issue?
Please do.
One of the things that we found out as we went through this, when you look at the language of Future Ready Iowa, Broadlines is doing what they propose to do. And I think sometimes what it takes is somebody has to take that first bullet. And now that we have some data to say, the people that come into our program, they do the same thing that the normal employee does. They give the attendance issues, the reasons they get fired for are the same. It's no different. So, as a matter of fact, I think because we put so much wraparound services into the program, our retention rate is probably a bit better than most people in that area.
That's a really good point.
I remember now.
Oh, perfect, Betty. Go ahead.
So one of the things that Dennis mentioned was, working with employers to take a look at, how long has it been for since the commitment of the crime, or even how long they've been out. Those are factors, because it is really evidence-based. It is that after about 7 years, there is no more likelihood that person will commit the crime or repeat a poor choice that they made years ago when they were young than anyone else. And so helping them see that. The other thing in terms of myth around banning the box. So again, banning the box meaning preventing or pushing that question to either the time of the interview or the time of a conditional offer. Recent studies have come out, just a few of them, saying that ban the box actually hurts people of color. And I really want to, as the NAACP, make it clear that it is not ban the box that hurts in employees or potential employees or people of color. What is happening is that the policy of having that box there is a way of pretense for discrimination. And so they could use, a potential employer could use that box to say, we don't want this person here, and particularly if it's an African-American person. And I say an African-American person or a person of color, because actually, if you look at the callback rate, a white man or a white person with a felony background is more likely to be called back than a Black man without. So it is a pretext to discrimination. And when you remove that box, what happens in those communities, not Iowa, that have had the box removed, but in those communities is that employers then, it's less covert. They don't have the box to hide behind. So they do other things that are racially disadvantageous for potential employers. So actually what ban the box does is it uncovers the discrimination below the surface. And so that's one of the myths that is out there. So when you see those studies, I encourage people to read it fully because it will tell you really what's happening. So I just wanted to make sure that people understood that myth. And the other thing is it's important for employers to be able to, if you are in a position where you are hiring people or where you are on a team that's looking at people, people should ask the question, why did Mike get that role, or why are we not looking at Jamal for that interview? Those kinds of questions are important. So when people ask me, what is it that we can do? That's one of the things that we can do. We can double check our processes and consistently stay on, just making sure that that's not kind of happening because it's built into our system.
Thank you. I do have one quick question from the chat before we go to our closing. So the question is there a resource for employers to know what skills people are being certified in, like the healthcare program at Broadlawn, so they know if they can plan to recruit people coming out of prison?
So I see Dennis is, go ahead. Okay, so I'm sorry, Dennis, and you can certainly add to this. There, in terms of resources, actually, the Department of Corrections has areas in which they offer the licensure training. The workshops are blending together, but I think I mentioned earlier that part of our work was to so that if a person goes through a process where they are doing an apprenticeship, that when they can get out of prison, they can actually be hired into the profession, and the licensure board does not ban them. So there is actually a list from the Department of Corrections, and then any other agency working in reentry can also provide that information. As a matter of fact, as part of the focus work that we did, we actually, one of the things was a huge, I don't know if it's database, but a place where you can see a number of those resources, those reentry resources. So I can look that up and make that available after this workshop to you, Amber, you can distribute it.
Perfect, thank you. All right, and we just have 1 or 2 minutes left for each of you. So Betty and Dennis, if you would each just give us closing remarks, really action steps for those of us listening today. What are things that we can do to help get rid of some of the obstacles in the community for people that are reentering?
If I could be really brief, because I think I've talked way more than Dennis. First of all, join the NAACP. We can help guide you there. I mentioned making sure that, if something comes up that you're asking questions, and then also make sure you are joining advocacy lists so that when something comes up in the legislature, you will be able to reach out to your legislator, and also just reach out to your legislator anyway and have a conversation. So that being said, I'll turn it over to Dennis.
Okay, so one of the things, I'm in the position I'm in today because people gave me opportunities. 95% of the people or more come out and they're intending to do the right thing. So it's up to us in society to make sure that they have the opportunities to be productive citizens. And you have to support the organizations that are in the immediate neighborhoods where these people are going to be released. Because without the resources, it's almost impossible for them to succeed. I had quite a bit. I had Wayne Ford, I had Doug Reichard, I had quite a few mentors, but it all was based on me and Wayne, that initial relationship with Wayne and Urban Dreams. It's like the NAACP. If you don't have these organizations, if you don't have the Evelyn K. Davises that help us get the supports, they help us get the skills that we need to be productive citizens, and then all we need is the opportunity to execute.